In 1857, they locked Adira, known across 3 Louisiana parishes as the most feared enslaved woman, inside an iron cell built for men twice her size, announcing her execution before sunrise. Guards bragged that chaining her alone in the plantation yard would end the string of sabotage no one could explain. By nightfall, the owners were already planning how they'd parade her broken body to frighten neighboring plantations into obedience. By dawn, the cell stood open, a guard lay unconscious in the dirt, and Adira had vanished without a trace. Within weeks, supply routes collapsed, overseers fled their posts, and entire plantations were forced into emergency council meetings. The men who swore they had contained her were the first to disappear. What happened between the moment they locked her up and the moment she made every one of them pay? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from. And make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The darkness before dawn hung thick over the plantation, broken only by the amber glow of torches carried by 3 men. Their boots crunched against gravel as they dragged a woman between them. Adira's feet touched ground every 3rd step. Her wrists were bound with rough hemp that had already worn her skin raw. Blood traced thin lines down her forearms. She did not struggle. She had learned long ago that resistance revealed weakness, and weakness invited cruelty. Overseer Wexler walked ahead, his shoulders squared with authority. He wore like armor. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip. The 2 guards flanking Adira gripped her arms with unnecessary force, their fingers digging into muscle hardened by years of labor that would have broken softer bodies. "Keep moving," one guard muttered. Adira's gaze remained forward. She catalogued everything: the distance to the main house, the position of the stables, the angle of torch light casting shadows across the yard. Information was survival. Information was power. Doors cracked open in the quarters. Faces appeared in windows, dark against darker interiors. No one spoke. The watching eyes held questions. No one dared voice aloud. Wexler stopped before a squat iron structure set apart from the other buildings, the holding cell. Its walls were thick metal sheets riveted together, designed to contain rather than comfort. A single barred window sat high on one wall, too small for escape. "Sabotage," Wexler announced to the silent watchers. His voice carried across the yard with practiced projection. Destruction of property, conspiracy against lawful authority. Adira said nothing. Her jaw remained set. Her breathing controlled despite the fire in her ribs where a boot had connected during her capture. Movement rippled through the watching crowd. An old woman's lips formed words without sound. A young man's hand tightened on a doorframe. The whispers started as vibrations in the air before becoming audible. "Silent storm," someone murmured. The name passed between watchers like contraband. "Quick, careful," a designation earned through years of quiet defiance that had never quite crossed into punishable rebellion until now. "The silent storm," another voice echoed, barely louder than breath. Wexler's head snapped toward the sound. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the quarters, searching for the source. The watchers became still as statued. No one met his gaze directly. "Get her inside," Wexler ordered. The guards shoved Adira forward. She stumbled but caught herself, her bare feet finding purchase on stone worn smooth by previous occupants. The cell door swung open with a metallic groan. Its hinges needed oil. That meant infrequent use. That meant they reserved this space for special cases. They pushed her through the threshold. She turned as the door slammed shut, studying the guards' faces through the bars. Both were young, both avoided her eyes. Wexler produced a heavy iron key and locked the mechanism with deliberate slowness. The bolt slid home with finality. "Dawn tomorrow," he said. His voice dropped lower. "Meant only for Adira. You'll hang before the whole plantation. An example." Adira met his gaze without flinching. Something in her steadiness made him look away first. The 3 men departed, their torches growing distant. The watching faces withdrew from windows, doors closed. The plantation returned to its enforced silence, though the name still echoed in the space between heartbeat. "Silent storm." Adira waited until the footsteps faded completely before allowing her shoulders to sag. Pain radiated from her left side where ribs had cracked during the beating. Her jaw etched where someone's fist had connected. Blood crusted beneath her nose. She catalogued each injury with clinical detachment. Nothing broken that would prevent movement. Nothing bleeding badly enough to weaken her before morning. She turned to examine her prison. The cell measured perhaps 8 ft square. Iron walls on 3 sides, stone on the 4th where it connected to a storage building. The floor was packed earth over stone foundation. The ceiling consisted of metal panels riveted together, perhaps 7 ft high. The single window offered a view of empty sky beginning to lighten with approaching dawn. Adira moved to the back wall and pressed her palm against the iron, cool to the touch despite the climate. She traced the rivets connecting the panels. Old construction. Years of humidity had left rust stains bleeding down from each connection point. She examined every rivet methodically. Some were solid, others showed pitting from corrosion. One near the corner, low where water would collect during storms, had rust completely obscuring the metal beneath. Adira knelt and studied it closer. The bolt securing this particular panel to its frame had degraded significantly. The surrounding metal showed similar damage. She touched it gently. Flakes of rust came away on her fingertips. Outside, voices rose as the plantation began waking, guards calling positions, overseers shouting orders, the machinery of oppression starting another day's rotation. Adira marked the changing light. She counted footsteps as guards passed near the cell. 3 times in the first hour, regular intervals, predictable patterns. She returned to the weakened bolt and considered it from multiple angles. The damage was extensive, but the panel remained secured by 3 other connection points. Removing this single bolt would not free the panel. Even if she could work it loose, the noise would alert the guards. Even if she could remove the entire panel, the opening would be tight. Her shoulders were broad from years of physical labor. Brute force would fail. Simple escape would fail. She needed strategy. She needed timing. She needed to transform this single weakness into an opening large enough to matter. Sun broke over the eastern horizon, spilling gold across the yard. A guard approached and stopped outside the cell. "Dawn tomorrow," he repeated unnecessarily. "Your execution happens at first light." Adira looked at the weakened bolt one final time, then settled against the wall to wait. The afternoon sun turned the iron cell into an oven. Heat radiated from every surface. The metal walls absorbed sunlight and held it, transforming the small space into something meant to punish before execution could. Sweat traced paths down Adira's spine, soaking into fabric already stiff with dried blood and dirt. She sat motionless against the back wall, conserving energy while her mind worked through calculations. The guards passed every 43 minutes. She had counted 5 rotations since dawn, marking time by the angle of light through the high window. The pattern held consistent. 2 guards approached from the east, walked the perimeter of the cell, exchanged brief words she could not quite hear, then continued toward the storage buildings beyond. Between rotations, the area around her prison remained empty. 43 minutes, enough time to work, not enough time to finish if she miscalculated. Adira shifted her weight slightly, testing the pain in her ribs. The sharp edge had dulled to a persistent ache, manageable. She flexed her fingers, rolled her shoulders, checked her range of motion. Everything functioned well enough for what came next. The weakened bolt demanded her attention. She studied it from her position against the wall, measuring angles without moving closer. The rust had compromised the metal thoroughly, but 3 other bolts still held the panel secure. She needed to apply force in a specific direction, not straight out, which would strain all 4 connection points, but at an angle that would stress the weakened bolt while the others bore minimal load. She visualized the movements required, position her back against the stone wall, plant her feet against the iron panel just left of center where the damaged bolt sat, push with her legs while bracing her shoulders against stone. The force would travel through her body in a controlled line, concentrating pressure where the metal had already begun to fail, but force alone remained insufficient. Noise would destroy everything. Adira listened to the sounds beyond her cell, voices from the quarters, the distant clang of tools from the blacksmith's shop, wheels grinding on gravel roads. The plantation created a constant backdrop of sound, but none loud enough to mask the screech of metal on metal when she worked the bolt. She needed something louder, something predictable. Thunder rumbled in the distance, so faint she almost missed it beneath the other noises. Adira turned her head toward the high window. The sky had shifted from morning's clear blue to afternoon's gathering haze. Clouds built on the western horizon, dark masses climbing upward with the promise of evening storms. Storm season brought rain nearly every night. The thunder would come, she just had to wait. Footsteps approached. The familiar pattern of guard rotation. Adira closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, slowing her heart rate, presenting the image of exhaustion and defeat. Let them see what they expected to see. Still alive in there, one guard called. Adira did not respond, probably asleep. They always sleep before the rope. The guards passed, 43 minutes until they returned. Adira moved to the weakened bolt and examined it more closely. She pressed her thumb against the rusted metal. It gave slightly, the corrosion creating gaps where solid iron should have been. The surrounding panel showed similar degradation. Years of humidity had done work no human effort could match. She applied gentle pressure, testing. The bolt shifted almost imperceptibly. The panel remained firmly attached, but the weakness was real. The weakness could be exploited. She returned to her position against the stone wall and waited. The sun crawled across the sky, heat intensified, then gradually faded as afternoon aged toward evening. Adira tracked the changing light while maintaining her breathing exercises, controlled inhale, measured exhales. Her body remained still, while her mind rehearsed every movement she would make. Position feet, brace shoulders, push with legs, time each effort with external noise. The thunder grew closer. The storm was building as she had anticipated. Footsteps approached again, different pattern this time, heavier, single person. A guard appeared carrying a tin cup of water. He stopped outside the bar door and studied her through the gaps in the metal. "Water," he announced. Adira rose slowly, favoring her injured side just enough to appear weakened. She approached the bars and extended her hands. The guard thrust the cup through the gap. "Drink it slow, it's the last you'll get." She took the water without comment and drank. The liquid was warm and tasted of rust, but her body absorbed it gratefully. She had sweated away too much moisture during the afternoon heat. "Should have thought about consequences before you broke things that didn't belong to you," the guard continued. His voice carried an edge of satisfaction. "Should have known your place." Adira returned the empty cup. She met his eyes without speaking. The guard's expression shifted slightly. Something uncertain flickered across his features. He looked away first. Taking the cup and stepping back from the bars, "Exertions at dawn," he muttered, then walked away faster than necessary. Adira returned to the back wall. The guard's nervousness told her everything she needed to know. They feared what she represented. They feared the name whispered that morning. They feared that even locked in iron and sentenced to death, she remained dangerous. They were right to be afraid. Darkness fell. The storm clouds had consumed the western sky, moving steadily eastward. Lightning flickered in the distance, followed by thunder that took several seconds to arrive. The storm was still miles away, but approaching. Adira positioned herself against the stone wall. She planted her feet against the iron panel left of center, her heels resting just beside the weakened bolt. The angle felt correct. The pressure would flow through her legs, through her core. Concentrated on the single point of failure, she waited for the next thunder. Lightning flashed, she counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Thunder rolled across the plantation, deep and sustained. Adira pushed. Her legs drove force into the panel. The metal groaned softly but held. She released immediately, returning to stillness before the sound could register as anything unusual. Nothing, no alarm, no footsteps rushing toward her cell. She waited, breathing carefully, listening to the night sounds. The storm continued its approach. The thunder came more frequently now, sometimes overlapping. Multiple cells of the system passed overhead. Lightning flashed again, closer this time. Thunder arrived after only 3 seconds. Adira pushed again, harder. The weakened bolt shifted. She felt it give beneath the pressure, the degraded metal compressing slightly. The panel flexed but remained attached. The other 3 bolts still held firm. She needed more force. She needed better timing. She needed the storm to grow louder. Wind picked up, rushing through the plantation with increasing strength. Trees creaked. Loose shutters banged against buildings. The storm was nearly overhead now, bringing chaos that would mask her efforts. Rain began falling in heavy drops that struck the iron roof like drum beats. Within moments, the drops became a downpour, hammering the metal with sustained noise that drowned out all subtler sounds. Lightning split the sky directly above. Thunder followed instantly, a crack so loud, Adira felt it in her chest. She braced her shoulders against stone and drove her legs into the panel with everything she had. The weakened bolt bent. The panel groaned, but the cell still held. Adira released and settled back against the wall, heart pounding, sweat mixing with rain that blew through the high window. The storm raged around her prison, wind and water and thunder creating a wall of sound. She had loosened the bolt significantly. She had proven the weakness could be exploited, but she had not broken free. The storm showed no signs of fading. If anything, the rain fell harder, the wind blew stronger, the thunder crashed louder. Adira waited for the next lightning strike, gathering her strength, preparing for the final push that would either free her or reveal the limits of her plan. The storm was loud enough now. When the next thunder came, she would break through or break herself, trying. Midnight passed while the storm consumed the world beyond Adira's cell. Rain hammered the iron roof in waves that rolled across the metal like thunder itself. Wind tore through the plantation grounds, ripping loose anything not properly secured. Trees bent and creaked. Buildings groaned under the assault. The night had become chaos. Adira waited in position against the stone wall, feet planted on the iron panel, shoulders braced for the next push. Her muscles burned from previous attempts, but the bolt had weakened considerably. She had felt it bend during her last effort. One more concentrated strike would finish what she had started. Lightning illuminated the cell interior in stark white flashes. Thunder followed so close the sound had no space between cause and effect. The storm sat directly overhead now, unleashing its full power on the plantation. Adira counted the seconds between strikes. The pattern had become almost rhythmic. Flash, immediate thunder, 3 seconds of rumbling aftermath, brief silence, flash, thunder, rumble, silence. She timed her breathing to match the cycle. Inhale during silence. Exhale during rumble. Focus during the brief gaps between flash. Thunder cracked like splitting wood. Adira drove her legs into the panel with every ounce of strength her body possessed. Her shoulders pressed hard against stone. Her core tightened. Her leg muscles screamed as she poured force into the single weakened point. The bolt snapped. The panel lurched outward with a shriek of metal that disappeared beneath the thunder's roar. Adira scrambled forward immediately, catching the panel before it could swing wide and crash against the cell frame. She eased it open just enough to create a gap, moving with controlled precision despite her racing heart. Cold rain struck her face as she squeezed through the opening. She emerged into the storm-torn night and dropped into a crouch beside the cell, scanning the darkness for movement. The yard appeared empty. Guards had retreated to covered positions during the worst of the storm. Unwilling to stand watch in conditions that made vision impossible and comfort non-existent, their lanterns created distant pools of yellow light near the main buildings, but the area around her cell remained dark. Adira moved along the wall, keeping low using the stone structure as cover. Her bare feet found purchase on mudslil as licked ground. Rain soaked through her thin clothing within seconds, but the cold water helped sharpen her focus. She was outside, she was free, she just had to stay that way. A figure emerged from the darkness ahead, materializing from the rain like a ghost. The guard walked with his head down, one hand holding his hat against the wind. He carried a lantern in his other hand, the light swinging wildly as he approached the cell. Adira pressed herself against the wall and waited. The guard reached the cell door and raised his lantern. He squinted through the bars, trying to see inside. His free hand reached for the latch to verify it remained secure. Adira stepped forward and struck. She grabbed his wrist and twisted, forcing him to drop the lantern. The light fell into mud and died. Immediately, her other hand found the pressure point on his neck, the exact spot that would send him into unconsciousness without permanent damage. He struggled for perhaps 2 seconds before his body went limp. She lowered him carefully to the ground and stripped his belt. Keys jangled from a metal ring. She took them and moved away from the cell, angling toward the fields where darkness would provide better cover than structures and walls. The quarters stood to her left, dark and silent. The main house rose to her right, windows glowing with lamplight behind shuttered glass. Ahead lay the fields, row after row of crops disappearing into rain and shadow. Adira ran. Her feet found the rhythm between rows, the pattern familiar from years of forced labor in these same fields. She knew every drainage ditch, every rise and depression in the land, every spot where water pooled during heavy rain. The knowledge guided her through darkness. The guards could not penetrate. Shouts erupted behind her. Someone had discovered the unconscious guard. Lantern light bobbed through the rain as searchers spread out from the cell. She's out. The prisoner escaped. More voices joined the first. More lights appeared. The plantation was waking despite the late hour and brutal weather. Adira increased her pace, ignoring the pain in her side and the burning in her lungs. The field rows led toward the tree line, toward the boundary where cultivated land gave way to wilderness. She focused on reaching those trees. A guard appeared ahead, cutting across the field to intercept her path. He carried a lantern in one hand and a club in the other. His light swung toward her, and for a moment she was illuminated in its glow. There he shouted, "Northeast field." Adira veered left and dropped into a drainage dip. Water rushed through the channel, swollen by hours of rain. She let the current carry her sideways, moving parallel to the field rows while submerged, except for her head. The guard's lantern swept across the area where she had been, finding only empty space. She emerged from the ditch 20 yards farther along and resumed running. The tree line was closer now, dark shapes rising against the slightly lighter sky. Behind her, the guards were spreading out, their lanterns creating a search pattern that methodically covered ground, but they moved cautiously, uncertain where she had gone. Their lights revealed only rain and mud and empty fields. Adira reached the trees and plunged into the forest without slowing. Thorns caught her clothing and scored her skin. Branches whipped her face and arms. The undergrowth grew thick where sunlight reached through gaps in the canopy, creating barriers that required strength to push through. She welcomed the pain. Pain meant movement. Movement meant survival. The ground became softer beneath her feet, transitioning from forest soil to wetland mud. Water pooled in low areas, reflecting what little light penetrated the storm clouds. The trees changed from hardwood to cypress, their roots rising above waterline like gnarled fingers. Adira knew this terrain. She had studied it from the plantation's edge during rare moments of rest, understanding that escape would eventually require knowledge of what lay beyond cultivated land. The wetlands extended for miles, a maze of water and mud and vegetation that could swallow anyone unfamiliar with its paths. She pushed deeper into the swamp, wading through water that rose from her ankles to her knees. The rain continued falling, but seemed gentler here beneath the canopy. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm beginning its migration eastward. Behind her, the shouts grew more organized. The alarm had spread beyond the immediate search party. The entire plantation was mobilizing now, preparing for a manhunt that would begin in earnest once the storm passed and daylight made tracking possible. Adira forced herself forward through mud that sucked at her feet with each step. Exhaustion pulled at her body, demanding rest. Her injured side throbbed. Her muscles trembled from sustained exertion. Her lungs burned from running through rain-thick air. But she could not stop, not yet. Not while the plantation remained close enough to send dogs and riders after her at first light. She needed distance. She needed to disappear into the swamp's deeper reaches where pursuers would hesitate to follow. Back at the cell, Guards gathered around the broken bolt, examining it by lantern light. Someone touched the bent metal and whistled low. She broke through iron, he said. Sound the alarm, another guard ordered. Full alarm, get everyone up, get the dogs ready. She can't have gone far in this weather. A bell began ringing from the main house, its tone cutting through the rain with sharp urgency. The sound carried across the plantation and into the surrounding countryside, alerting neighboring properties that a dangerous prisoner had escaped. Adira heard the bell and pushed deeper into darkness. The swamp closed around her, water and mud and twisted vegetation creating a world where lantern light could not reach. She was exhausted, she was wounded, she was hunted, but she was alive. Dawn broke through the canopy in weak gray light, revealing a landscape transformed by the storm. Water covered everything, turning solid ground into uncertain terrain where each step required testing and faith. Adira moved through it with mechanical determination, her body operating on instinct, while her mind drifted toward unconsciousness. She had stopped hearing the plantation bell hours ago. Either the alarm had ceased, or she had traveled far enough that distance muffled the sound. Both possibilities felt equally distant, equally irrelevant. Only movement mattered now, only the next step, then the next, then the one after that. Her injured side had progressed beyond pain into numbness. The cold water soothed inflammation, but also leached warmth from her core. She shivered constantly despite exertion, her teeth chattering between gasps for air. The vegetation grew thicker as she penetrated deeper into the wetlands. Reeds rose taller than her head, creating walls of green that limited visibility to arm's length in any direction. She pushed through them, feeling their edges slice small cuts into her already aerated skin. Her foot caught on a submerged root. She stumbled forward, barely catching herself on a cypress trunk. The bark scraped her palms. She held on for a moment, resting her forehead against the rough surface, breathing hard, just a little farther, just until she found higher ground, just until she could rest without drowning in her sleep. She released the tree and took another step, then another. The water deepened to her thighs, forcing her to wade rather than walk. Her progress slowed to a crawl as exhaustion finally overwhelmed determination. Her vision blurred. The reeds seemed to multiply, shifting and swaying even when wind did not blow. She blinked hard, trying to clear her sight, but the world refused to stabilize. Her knees buckled. She fell forward into the water, catching herself on her hands before her face submerged. For a long moment she remained there on all fours in the swamp, water flowing around her body. She tried to push herself upright, but her arms would not cooperate. This is how it ends, she thought distantly. Not by execution, by collapse. She managed to drag herself toward what looked like slightly higher ground, a muddy bank where reeds grew from soil instead of standing water. She pulled herself onto it and rolled onto her back, staring up at the canopy while her chest heaved with labored breathing. Rest just for a moment, just until strength returned. Her eyes closed, found something. The voice came from somewhere above her, young and uncertain. Adira tried to open her eyes, but her body refused the command. She alive? Another voice slightly deeper. Think so. She's breathing. Hands touched her shoulder, gentle but firm. Someone was checking her pulse, assessing her condition with practiced efficiency. Get Alias, the second voice ordered. Tell him we have a visitor. Tell him she looks like she ran through hell to get here. Footsteps splashed away through water. The remaining presence stayed close, and Adira felt fabric being draped over her body, a blanket rough but dry. Can you hear me? The young voice asked. You're safe. We're going to help you. Adira managed to open her eyes to slits. A face hovered above her, belonging to a boy who could not have seen more than 16 years. His expression mixed concern with excitement, the look of someone encountering something unexpected and significant. What's your name? He asked. She tried to speak, but produced only a rasp. Her throat had closed from dehydration and exertion. Don't talk yet, the boy said. Save your strength. We'll get you to the settlement. More footsteps approached. Multiple people this time. Hands slipped beneath her body, lifting her with coordinated effort. She was being carried through the swamp, her rescuers navigating terrain with the confidence of long familiarity. Easy with her, Lonnie. Someone cautioned, we don't know what injuries she's carrying. The world blurred into fragments of sensation, movement, voices, the sensation of being transported through water and across solid ground. She drifted in and out of awareness, her consciousness too depleted to maintain focus. When clarity returned, she found herself lying on a raised platform inside a structure built from salvaged lumber and woven palm fronds. Daylight filtered through gaps in the walls, creating patterns of light and shadow across packed earth floor. A woman knelt beside her, older and weathered, applying something cool to the cuts on Adira's arms. The substance stung briefly before numbing the pain. Medicinal paste made from swamp plants. You're awake, the woman observed without looking up from her work. Good means you're stronger than you look. Adira tried to sit up, but gentle pressure on her shoulder kept her down. Not yet, the woman said. Let me finish treating these wounds, then we'll see about getting food and water into you. The boy from earlier, Lanny, appeared in the doorway. Elias wants to see her once she can stand. Tell Elias she'll stand when she's ready and not before. Woman replied firmly, I won't have him interrogating someone in this condition. He said it's urgent. Everything's urgent to Elias. She'll keep another hour. Lonnie retreated, and the woman continued her methodical treatment. She cleaned each wound, applied paste, and wrapped the worst cuts with strips of clean cloth. Her movements carried the efficiency of someone who had performed this task many times before. What's your name? The woman asked as she worked. Adira. The woman's hands paused briefly before resuming their work. Just Adira. Yes, where'd you run from? Ashford Plantation, north of here. The woman nodded slowly. We know Ashford. Heard their alarm bell last night during the storm. Figured someone made a break for it. She finished wrapping a cut on Adira's forearm. Didn't figure they'd make it this far. She produced a water skin and held it. Adira's lips drank slowly. The water was cool and clean, tasting of minerals and earth. Adira forced herself to sip rather than gulp, knowing her stomach would rebel against too much too quickly. After several swallows, the woman pulled the water skin away. That's enough for now. I'll give you more in a bit, along with some food. She sat back on her heels, studying Adira with sharp eyes. You've got training. The way you carry yourself, even exhausted and injured. Military, no, but you fought before. When necessary, the woman's expression revealed nothing. She gathered her supply and stood. Rest while you can. Elias doesn't wait long, and once he starts asking questions, he expects answers. She left, and Adira was alone in the structure. She used the privacy to assess her surroundings more carefully. The platform she lay on was constructed from salvaged planks, elevated to keep occupants above water during flooding. The walls were woven tight enough to block rain, but loose enough to allow air circulation. Everything spoke of practical construction by people who understood their environment intimately. Through the gaps, she could see portions of the settlement. Other structures similar to this one connected by raised walkways, people moving between buildings with purpose, carrying tools and supplies, children playing under watchful supervision, a community that had built something functional and sustainable in terrain most people considered uninhabitable. Footsteps approached on the walkway outside. A man entered, tall and lean, with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. He carried himself with quiet authority, the bearing of someone accustomed to leadership through earned respect rather than imposed power. I'm Elias, he said. This is my settlement. You're Adira, yes. He pulled a stool close to the platform and sat, studying her with the same sharp assessment the woman had employed. Lonnie found you collapsed near our northern lookout. That's deep swamp. Difficult terrain even for people who know it. You came from Ashford, yes? That's 10 miles through wetlands in the dark. During a storm, he leaned forward slightly. Most people who try that route die before they reach half the distance. Adira said nothing, conserving her strength. Elias continued. Ash has been getting worse over the past year. New overseer, harsher methods. We've heard stories. He paused. We've also heard other stories about someone on that plantation who fought back. Someone they feared enough to keep in chains when they weren't working her. Someone they called. Don't, Adira interrupted. Whatever name you heard, I don't use it. I'm just Adira. Elias regarded her for a long moment. Fair enough. Just Adira, who broke out of an iron cell and crossed 10 miles of swamp in one night. He stood and moved to the doorway, looking out at the settlement. We've built something here. 43 people living free in a place where hunters don't follow. We stay safe by staying hidden and staying smart. He turned back to face her. Your escape will bring searchers. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually they'll push deeper into the wetlands than they usually risk. That puts my people in danger. I didn't know this settlement existed, Adira said. I know, but now you do, and you're here, and decisions need to be made. He crossed his arms. Council meets at evening. We'll discuss whether you stay or go. Until then, you rest and you eat, build back some strength. His expression softened slightly. Nobody here wants to send you back into the swamp before you're ready, but we also can't ignore the risk you represent. He left without waiting for response. Adira lay back down, staring at the ceiling while exhaustion and relief weared in her chest. She was alive, she was sheltered, but safety remained conditional, dependent on the judgment of people who had their own survival to protect. By evening, Adira had recovered enough to walk short distances without support. The woman who had treated her wounds, her name was Hannah, brought corn, porridge, and wild greens along with more water. The food settled heavily in Adira's stomach, but stayed down, providing fuel her body desperately needed. As the sun set, painting the swamp in shades of orange and purple, people gathered in the settlement's central structure. It was larger than the others, built to accommodate group meetings. Lanterns hung from the ceiling, casting warm light across faces weathered by hardship and determined survival. Elias stood at the front, while others arranged themselves on benches and stools. Adira sat near the back, positioned where she could observe without drawing attention. We all know why we're here. Elias began. We have a visitor. She escaped from Ashford Plantation during last night's storm. She's injured and exhausted, and by our customs, she deserves shelter and care. He paused, but her presence creates complications we need to address. A man in his 30s spoke up. Ashford's bell rang for hours. They're organizing a serious search. Dogs, riders, maybe even bounty hunters. If they track her here, they won't. Lanny interjected. The storm washed away her trail. I checked the route she came in by. No tracks, no scent markers, nothing to follow. This time, an older woman said, but Ashford won't stop looking. They never do when someone escapes, and if they push deeper into the swamp, they might stumble onto us even without a trail to follow. Hannah stood, so we send her away, weak and barely recovered. That's not who we are. We're people who protect our own, someone else countered. She's not our own. She's a stranger who brought danger to our door. Elias raised his hand, quieting the rising debate. Both points stand. We don't abandon people who need help. We also don't ignore threats to our community. He looked directly at Adira. What do you say? What are your intentions? All eyes turned to her. Adira stood slowly, feeling the weight of their collective judgment. I didn't know this place existed, she said clearly. I was running from execution, trying to reach anywhere that wasn't Ashford. I have no claim on your shelter, and no right to endanger what you've built. She met Elias's gaze steadily. If you want me gone, I'll leave at first light. If you're willing to let me stay until I'm strong enough to travel safely, I'll contribute however I can and move on when the time's right. Silence filled the structure. People absorbed her words. Ella's nodded slowly, direct. I appreciate that. He turned back to the assembly. Here's what I propose. She stays until she's recovered enough to travel without dying within a day. While she's here, we double our watch rotations and scout farther out for any sign of searchers. We also review our defensive positions and make sure we can disappear deeper into the swamp if necessary. He looked around the room. Her escape reminded us that Ashford's getting more aggressive. That's information worth having, even if it comes with complications. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering, though some faces remained skeptical. All in favor? Elias asked. Hands rose slowly, one after another, until a clear majority showed support. Settled then, Elias said, Adira stays until recovered. We increase security, and we use this time to make sure our community can handle whatever comes next. He dismissed the council with a nod. People filed out, some glancing at Adira with curiosity, others with weariness. Hannah approached and squeezed her shoulder briefly before leaving. Elias remained behind, waiting until they were alone. "You bought yourself time," he said. "Use it wisely, help where you can, learn our routines, and most importantly," he stepped closer, his voice dropping, "understand that if your presence brings real danger to these people, I will choose them over you every time without hesitation." "I understand," Adira replied. "Good." He moved toward the exit, then paused. "Hannah says you have combat training, real training, not just survival fighting. If that's true, maybe you can help strengthen our defensive knowledge while you're here. God knows we could use it." He left, and Adira stood alone in the empty council structure, surrounded by dying lantern light, and the knowledge that her survival remained temporary, conditional, and entirely dependent on circumstances beyond her control. Morning light filtered through the gaps in the hut's walls, waking Adira before most of the settlement stirred. Her body etched less than yesterday. Though stiffness remained in her shoulders and lower back, she sat up carefully, testing her range of motion. Better, not fully recovered, but functional. She stepped outside onto the raised walkway, breathing in air thick with moisture and the earthy smell of decaying vegetation. The settlement spread before her in calculated arrangement. 6 primary structures connected by elevated paths, with smaller storage platforms positioned at strategic intervals. Cooking fires were built in designated areas where smoke could disperse naturally through the canopy. Everything showed deliberate planning aimed at minimizing detection, but Adira's trained eye caught problems immediately. The northern approach had clear sight lines into the settlement center. Anyone positioned in those trees could observe most daily activities without being seen. The southern perimeter relied on natural barriers, thorns, and dense undergrowth, but lacked active monitoring. If someone willing to endure discomfort pushed through, they'd reach the settlement's edge without triggering any alarm. People emerged from their huts as sunrise strengthened. Children were shepherded to a central platform where an older woman began teaching lessons. Adults dispersed to various tasks, tending fish traps, repairing structures, processing food, crafting tools. The community functioned with practiced efficiency born from necessity. Lonnie appeared on the walkway carrying a wooden bucket. He brightened when he saw Adira awake. "You're up early," he said. "Most people who cross the swamp like you did sleep for 2 days straight." "Can't afford to waste time," Adira replied. "Hannah left food in your hut, said you should eat before doing anything else." He set down the bucket. "But if you're feeling strong enough, some of us practice basic defense techniques in the morning. Nothing fancy, just enough to maybe survive if we ever got cornered." "Show me." Lonnie led her to a clearing slightly removed from the main settlement where 4 young people, 3 men and 1 woman, all in their late teens or early 20s, were already stretching and warming up. They stopped when they saw Adira approach, uncertainty crossing their faces. "This is Adira," Lanny announced. "She's staying with us for a bit. I thought maybe she could watch our practice, give us feedback." The woman stepped forward, her expression cautious but direct. "I'm Maya. We've heard stories about what happened at Ashford. If even half of them are true, you know more about real fighting than we do. What have you been practicing?" Adira asked. They demonstrated their routine. Basic strikes, defensive blocks, grappling positions. The fundamentals were present but lacked refinement. Their stances left them unbalanced. Their strikes telegraphed intention too obvious. Their defensive movements wasted energy on excessive motion. "You're thinking about individual techniques," Adira said when they finished. "You need to think about combinations flow, using your opponent's energy against them instead of just trying to overpower." She stepped into the clearing center. "Attack me, all of you, don't hold back." They hesitated until Maya moved first, throwing a committed punch toward Adira's midsection. Adira sidestepped minimally, redirecting Maya's momentum with a light touch that sent the younger woman stumbling past. Before Maya could recover, one of the men rushed from the side. Adira dropped low, sweeping his legs while simultaneously deflecting another attacker's gra. Within seconds, all 4 were on the ground or off balance while Adira remained centered and controlled. Again, She said they attacked repeatedly. Each time Adira demonstrated different defensive principles: leverage over strength, timing over speed, positioning over aggression. She moved with economical precision, never using more force than necessary, always maintaining awareness of multiple threats simultaneously. After the fifth attempt, they were breathing hard while Adira barely showed exertion. "How do you do that?" Lonnie asked, genuinely eager. "Practice, focus, understanding that fighting isn't about proving strength, it's about surviving." Adira gestured for them to stand. "Your training focuses too much on what you do. You need to focus on reading what your opponent does, then responding appropriately." She spent the next hour breaking down principles, demonstrating techniques slowly, correcting stances and positioning. They absorbed the instruction eagerly, asking questions and attempting to replicate what she showed them. Word spread through the settlement, and soon a small audience gathered to watch. By mid-morning, several elders stood observing from the walkway. Their expressions ranged from impressed to deeply troubled. After the training session ended, Adira approached Elias near the settlement's main structure. He was reviewing a hand-drawn map spread across a worked. "Your night patrol routes have gaps," she said without preamble. "The eastern approach is unwatched between midnight and dawn. Someone who knew the timing could reach your perimeter without detection." Elias looked up sharply. "You've been here less than 2 days, and you're already analyzing our defenses. You asked if I could help. This is how I help." He studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the map. "Show me." Adira traced the patrol patterns with her finger, identifying vulnerabilities and suggesting adjustments that would provide better coverage without requiring additional personnel. She explained how to position watchers to maximize sight lines while minimizing their own visibility. She pointed out natural choke points that could be monitored more efficiently than open areas. Elias listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. His initial defensiveness gradually shifted to genuine interest. "You think tactically," he said when she finished, "like someone with military training. I think about survival. That requires understanding how threats move and how to counter them. Where did you learn this?" Adira hesitated. Necessity, observation, paying attention to patterns over years. She met his gaze, and from making mistakes that cost people their lives. Ella's absorbed this, then rolled up the map. "I'll discuss these changes with the patrol leaders tonight. If they agree the improvements make sense, we'll implement them starting tomorrow." "Good." He paused before leaving. "Some of the elders are worried. They saw you training those young people. They're concerned that your presence is turning the settlement from a refuge into something else. Something more aggressive. I'm teaching them how not to die if they're ever cornered." Adira said, "That's not aggression. That's preparation." "I know, but preparation for violence still involves violence. Some people here have spent years avoiding even the possibility of confrontation." He sighed. "Just be aware that not everyone appreciates what you're offering." That evening, the community gathered for a shared meal. People ate in small groups, conversation flowing naturally around topics of weather, repairs needed, supplies running low. Adira sat with Hannah, Lanny, and Maya, answering quiet questions about her escape. She described the weakened bolt, the storm's timing, the guard rotations she'd memorized. She explained how she'd navigated through darkness using sound and spatial memory. She spoke matter-of-factly, neither dramatizing nor minimizing the danger involved. Supply runners moved between the plantations every 3 days, Adira said. She stood with Elias near the settlement's eastern edge, watching dawn light spread across the wetlands. "They carry messages, documents, coordination orders. If we intercept them, we can learn what's being planned." Elias crossed his arms, "And when the messages don't arrive, they'll assume the runner got lost or injured in the swamp. It happens often enough that one missing courier won't trigger immediate suspicion." Adira gestured toward the map they'd studied earlier. "The route passes through a narrow section between 2 deep water channels. Perfect place for a quick interception." "Quick?" Elias repeated skeptically. "Nothing in these wetlands moves quickly. Then we move carefully, quietly. We take what information we can, destroy the rest, and disappear before anyone knows we were there." Ellis was silent for a long moment, weighing risks against potential benefits. Finally, he nodded. "You can take 3 people, no more. If anything goes wrong, you abandon the mission immediately and return here. I won't risk losing anyone for documents that might tell us nothing useful." "Understood." "And Adira." He met her gaze directly. "This settlement has survived by avoiding confrontation. If your presence changes that if you turn us into targets, I'll ask you to leave." "No matter how valuable your skills might be." "Fair enough." An hour later, Adira moved through the swamp with 3 companions, Lonnie, Maya, and a quiet man in his 30s named Marcus, who knew the wetlands better than anyone in the settlement. They traveled in single file, stepping carefully on solid ground, avoiding areas where mud could trap or suck at their feet. Adira led, setting a measured pace that covered distance without exhausting them. She paused frequently to listen, reading the environment through sound and movement. Bird calls signaled undisturbed areas. Sudden silence indicated potential threats. Water ripples revealed whether wildlife or humans had passed recently. Marcus occasionally directed them around particularly treacherous sections, his knowledge proving invaluable. Maya moved with athletic grace, adapting quickly to the terrain. Lonnie struggled more, but kept pace without complaint, his determination compensating for inexperience. They reached the interception point by mid-morning. The path the courier would use cut between 2 channels of slow-moving water, creating a natural bottleneck where thick vegetation provided concealment. Adira positioned everyone strategically, Marcus watching their rear approach, Maya covering the forward exit, Lonnie ready to assist wherever needed. Then they waited. Adira had learned patience through years of necessity. She remained motionless, breathing slowly, muscles relaxed but ready. The others fidgeted initially, but gradually settled into stillness as time passed. The courier appeared shortly after noon. He was young, maybe 17, moving with the confident carelessness of someone who'd made this journey dozens of times without incident. A leather satchel hung across his chest, bulging with documents. He picked his way along the path, occasionally swatting at insects, completely unaware of the 4 people watching from concealment. Adira waited until he passed her position, then stepped onto the path behind him. "Don't run." The courier spun, eyes going wide. His hand moved toward the satchel instinctively. "Don't," Adira repeated. Her voice remained calm, but carried absolute certainty. "We only want what you're carrying. Give it to us, and you can walk away." The young man's gaze darted between Adira and the others, emerging from cover. He was outnumbered, isolated, and clearly terrified. "They'll kill me if I lose these messages." "They'll never know you encountered us," Adira said. "You'll tell them you were robbed by desperate fugitives. They'll believe it because it's true." "I can't." "You can," Adira interrupted, "and you will, because the alternative is much worse for you." The threat hung unspoken, but clear. After a long, tense moment, the courier unbuckled the satchel and handed it over with shaking hands. "Smart choice," Adira said. She gestured for him to continue down the path. "Go. Don't look back." He stumbled forward, breaking into a run once he was past them. Maya started to follow, but Adira stopped her with a raised hand. "Let him go. We got what we came for." They moved deeper into cover before examining the satchel's contents. Inside were several documents, patrol schedules for 3 nearby plantations, correspondence about increased security measures, a list of suspected fugitives with Adira's name prominently featured, and detailed instructions for coordinating searches across the region. "They're organizing," Marcus said quietly, reading over Adira's shoulder. "This isn't individual plantations acting alone anymore. They're working together because of you," Meyer added, looking at Adira. "Your escape scared them." "Good." Adira sorted through the papers methodically. Fear makes people predictable. They'll focus resources on obvious approaches while neglecting others. She separated the documents into 2 piles: information worth keeping and material to destroy. The patrol schedules went into the first category. Most correspondence went into the second. She pulled out a blank page and a piece of charcoal from the satchel. "What are you doing?" Elani asked, giving them false information. Adira sketched a crude map showing fugitive activity in areas completely opposite to where the Maroon settlement actually existed. She forged a short message about sightings near the eastern border, deliberately making the handwriting rough and unpracticed to suggest a barely literate informant. "We'll leave this in the satchel along with enough legitimate papers that it looks like the courier just lost a few documents during his journey." She placed everything back carefully, arranging it to appear slightly disheveled, but not obviously tampered with. Then she hid the satchel in a location the courier would plausibly have dropped it, partially concealed under fallen branches near the path. "Now we go home," Adira said. The return journey proved more dangerous than anticipated. They were halfway back when Marcus suddenly raised his fist, signaling everyone to freeze. Adira heard it a moment later, voices, multiple people coming from their left, not the panicked courier, but something worse. Mounted patrol, the group dropped low as riders emerged onto a parallel path perhaps 50 yards away. 3 men on horseback, armed with rifles, moving slowly through difficult terrain. They appeared to be searching methodically, checking both sides of their route. Adira assessed their options rapidly. Moving would create noise that might draw attention. Staying put risked being spotted if the patrol changed direction. The water channels were too deep and too exposed to cross quickly. She gestured to the others, communicating silently, spread out, minimized profile, controlled breathing, absolute stillness. The patrol drew closer, near enough that Adira could hear their conversation. "Waste of time, nobody crosses through here. Captain says check everywhere, so we check everywhere. Captain's paranoid since that woman escaped. Acts like she's some kind of ghost who could be anywhere." They continued past, complaints fading gradually as distance increased. Adira waited a full 10 minutes after the last sound disappeared before allowing anyone to move. "That was too close," Marcus whispered. "But you all stayed quiet," Adira observed. "You controlled your fear and trusted the situation instead of panicking. That's what keeps you alive." They reached the settlement as twilight settled across the wetlands. Elias met them at the perimeter, relief visible on his weathered face when he confirmed everyone had returned safely. "Well," he asked. Adira handed him the documents they'd kept. "They're coordinating across multiple plantations, increasing patrols, offering rewards for information about fugitive locations." She pointed to the map showing patrol schedules. "But now we know exactly where they'll be looking and when." Elias reviewed the papers, his expression growing more serious. "This is valuable intelligence, and there's more we can do with it." Adira said, "These schedules tell us which plantations are weakest on which nights, when guard changes happen, where attention is focused versus where it's neglected." Several community members had gathered to listen, including some of the elders who'd expressed concern about Adira's presence. One of them, a gay-haired woman named Ruth, stepped forward. "You brought them back safely," Ruth said, studying Adira carefully. "And you gained information without bloodshed. That was the goal." Ruth nodded slowly. "Perhaps you're not the reckless danger we feared. Perhaps you're something different, something we need." The shift in atmosphere was subtle, but unmistakable. People who'd watched Adira with suspicion now regarded her with cautious respect. The successful mission had demonstrated her value beyond individual combat skill. She could lead, she could plan, she could execute operations that enhanced the community's security rather than threatening it. Ella's rolled up the documents. "We'll review these tonight at council. Decide how best to use what you've gathered." The afternoon council meeting drew nearly everyone in the settlement. People crowded into the largest communal space, a covered area built between 4 ancient cypress trees. Adira stood before them, her expression calm despite the weight of what she was about to propose. "The documents we recovered yesterday confirm something I've suspected for months," she began. My former plantation keeps a master ledger, a complete record of every transaction, every deal, every corrupt payment made to officials who look the other way. It contains names, dates, amounts, evidence that would destroy the political protection shielding the operation. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Elias leaned forward from his position at the council table. You're talking about infiltrating the plantation itself. Yes, that's suicide. Someone called from the back. Even for you. Adira met the speaker's eyes. It's calculated risk. I know the building layout, guard patterns, entry points. I know which floorboards creak and which windows stick. I spent years there learning every detail, whether I intended to or not. An elderly council member named Samuel spoke up. And what happens when you're caught? When they torture you for information about this settlement? They won't catch me? Adira's voice carried absolute conviction. But if somehow they did, I know nothing about this location. You found me collapsed in the wetlands. I spent a few days recovering and left. That's the story everyone here should know and believe. Jonas, the settlement's eldest member, rose slowly to his feet. His weathered hands gripped a walking stick carved from swampwood. I've listened to debates about this woman since she arrived. Some call her dangerous, others call her necessary. I say she's both. But that ledger, he paused, gathering strength. That ledger could change everything, not just for us, for every person still trapped under that system. It could also bring hell down on all of us. Another council member argued, drawing more attention, more searches, more danger. We're already in danger, Jonas replied. The question is whether we face that danger while cowering or while fighting back. The debate continued for another hour. Arguments flowed back and forth, voices rising and falling with passion and fear. Adira remained silent during most of it, understanding that the community needed to reach its own decision. This couldn't be her will imposed on others. It had to be their collective choice. Finally, Elias called for a vote. The council split nearly even, but the final count favored supporting the mission by 2 votes. Elias looked at Adira with an expression mixing respect and deep concern. You have our support, but you take only volunteers, and you take minimal risk to their lives. Understood, understood. By nightfall, Adira had assembled her team. Marcus volunteered immediately, his knowledge of the wetlands crucial for approach and escape route. Lanny insisted on coming despite his relative inexperience. Maya joined as well, her quick reflexes potentially valuable if complications arose. They departed 2 hours after sunset, moving through darkness with practiced silence. The route took them along waterways Adira had memorized during her earlier escape, retracing paths she'd fled down in desperate panic. Now she traveled them with cold calculation, every step purposeful. They reached the plantation's edge shortly before midnight. Adira positioned the others in concealed locations with clear sight lines. The building she needed to access. Their role was simple: observe, signal if patrols approached, and retreat immediately if the situation deteriorated. Under no circumstances were they to attempt a rescue if she was discovered. If I'm not back in 1 hour, Adira told them, leave. Don't wait, don't investigate. Just go. She moved alone toward the administrative building. The plantation slept, but wasn't unguarded. Torches burned at intervals, creating pools of light she avoided with careful timing. A guard walked a lazy circuit around the main house, his pattern predictable after years of uneventful nights. Adira waited in shadow, counting his steps, measuring his pace. When he turned the far corner, she crossed the open ground in seconds. The storage office occupied the eastern side of a secondary building away from the main residence. Records were kept there along with supplies, tools, and items too valuable to leave in the general work areas. Adira had cleaned this building countless times, scrubbing floors while memorizing every detail that might someday prove useful. The door was locked, but the window above it had a broken latch she'd noticed months ago and never mentioned. She climbed using handholds she'd identified previously, rough boards, protruding nails, a structural beam, and eased the window open inch by careful inch. Inside, she dropped to the floor in absolute silence. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the shutters, providing just enough illumination. Navigate, Adira moved to the filing cabinet where plantation records were stored. The master ledger would be in the locked drawer, the one containing documents the overseer considered most valuable. She pulled a thin piece of metal from her sleeve, a tool fashioned weeks ago from a broken hinge. Working by touch more than sight, she manipulated the simple lock mechanism until it clicked open. The ledger sat inside exactly where she'd expected. A thick book bound in leather, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting documenting years of corruption, payments to local officials, bribes, judges, arrangements with merchants to fence stolen goods, every transaction that kept the plantation operating outside legal boundaries. Adira lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight. So much evil condensed into bound paper. She tucked it inside her shirt, closed the drawer and locked it. Again, anyone checking casually would see nothing disturbed. The ledger's absence might not be noticed for days, possibly weeks. Getting out proved simpler than entering. She climbed back through the window, closed it behind her, and dropped to the ground just as the guard completed another circuit. She pressed against the building's shadow, waiting for him to pass, then moved swiftly toward the tree. Marcus, Maya, and Lonnie materialized from concealment as she approached their position. No words were exchanged. They simply fell into formation and began the return journey, moving as quickly as terrain and darkness allowed. Dawn found them approaching the settlement's perimeter, exhausted but successful. Adira carried the ledger against her chest, feeling its presence like a weapon finally obtained after long preparation. But something was wrong. The settlement felt different. Too quiet, too still. Alias met them at the entrance, his face drawn with grief and anger. Others gathered behind him, their expressions ranging from sorrow to barely contained rage. What happened? Adira asked, though dread already coiled in her stomach. Slave catchers came at dawn yesterday. Elias said, his voice heavy. A sweep through the outer wetlands. They were looking for you based on false reports, but they found our fishing camp instead. Most got away, but Jonas, he stopped composing himself. Jonas was there. He couldn't run fast enough. They took him. The words hit Adira like physical blows. Jonas, the elder who'd spoken in her favor, the man who'd supported this mission despite his age and vulnerability. Where did they take him? Her voice came out flat, drained of emotion. Back to your former plantation. They're holding him as bait, waiting to see if anyone comes for him. Ella's met her eyes, waiting to see if you come for him. Adira stood motionless, the ledger suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. She planned everything carefully, minimized risk, executed flawlessly. And still, someone had paid the price. Still, the system had found a way to punish those around her. Ruth stepped forward, her weathered face etched with complicated emotion. This isn't your fault, child. Jonas made his own choices. We all did. He's captured because of me. Adira's hands trembled slightly, the first crack in her controlled exterior. Because I was here, because I drew attention, because my actions always have consequences beyond what I can predict or control. No, Elias said firmly. He's captured because this system is evil and captures anyone it can reach. That was true before you arrived and will be true after you leave. You didn't create this situation. You're just refusing to accept it. But his words couldn't erase the image forming in Adira's mind. Jonas, elderly and frail in chains, suffering because he'd defended her, held as bait in a trap designed specifically to exploit whatever humanity she had left. She looked down at the ledger pressed against her chest. Evidence that could destroy the plantation's power structure, proof that could unravel years of corruption, all obtained while an old man who'd supported her was being dragged into captivity, strategy, and human cost. The eternal calculation she could never escape. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist that clung to the wetlands. Adira sat alone at the marsh's edge, far enough from the settlement that conversation wouldn't reach her, but close enough that she remained within the community's protective perimeter. The ledger rested beside her on a flat rock, its leather cover already warping slightly in the humidity. She opened it, forcing herself to read the meticulous entries. Page after page documented systematic corruption. Payments to county officials for overlooking violations, bribes to judges for favorable rulings in disputes, arrangements with merchants to purchase goods stolen from enslaved laborers, financial records showing how the plantation operated outside legal boundaries while presenting a respectable facade to the wider world. This evidence could destroy them, expose their seed,